Prame. He came here to Bread of Life Church back in 2005. Who's been here since 2005-ish? Okay. You're the reason we're still here. He would have loved to take a project in South Carolina, Texas, Florida, where it's not covered in snow. But because of you, we're still here. So I think it might have been because of me as well. So actually, my mom is here today. Thank you. You're welcome. I grew up on a farm just south of here, and Prem and I met back in 2015 at a church here in Egan. And I was on staff at the time, so that's where we attended when we were first married. But then during the pandemic, our second child was born, and that's when I decided to stay home more. And so we were looking for a church home. And we tried some different things, and finally we came back to VLC because this is where our closest friends were. But also, I have to tell you on Mother's Day, also we saw the children in this church. And they are amazing. Your kids are so warm and loving and smart, and they do really good at JBQ. And so we knew that this was the place for us. So we've been back for about a year and a half now, and it really has been a privilege. So Pastor, thank you for having me today. It really is an honor. And I do want to talk about Mother's Day. And I know Mother's Day can be a little bit loaded because some of us are missing moms today. You know, some of us are grieving not being a mom, or some of us are tired. Anybody else tired today? Okay. And so I want to give some practical wisdom, but also some spiritual. I know we have spiritual parents here as well. And so we're going to hold both of those in tension today. So we're going to be grounded in Psalm 128. This is the NIV version, and we'll start there. Blessed are all who fear the Lord, who walk in obedience to him. You will eat the fruit of your labor. Blessings and prosperity will be yours. Your wife will be like a fruitful vine within your house. Your children will be like olive shoots around your table. Yes, this will be the blessing for the man who fears the Lord. May the Lord bless you from Zion. May you see the prosperity of Jerusalem all the days of your life. May you live to see your children's children. Peace be on Israel. And so we're going to hold two different truths in tension today. We are going to look at just some practical advice for parents. Don't worry, it's not my own. It's from people who are much more experienced. Also, though, the spiritual implications of this. Because when we're looking at the Psalms and the Old Testament, everything is pointing to Jesus, right? And everything is pointing to the gospel and the life that we are privileged to walk in today. And so we're going to look at that as well. I mentioned, actually, my mom is here. She carried twins full term. And so she is an amazing mother. I also have, and my dad too, he's not here, but he's amazing. I also have a spiritual mother named Peggy, and she was the one who introduced me to Princeton. And so we were at our old church in Egan. He was sitting like right about here. And on his very first weekend visiting, he actually happened to sit next to Peggy and her husband, Dave. They were getting ready to travel to India for a missions trip. And she looked over at him and she was like, is he from India? And so throughout the course of the service, she's kind of checking him out. And at the end, she goes up and introduced herself. She said, my name's Peggy. This is Dave. We're getting ready to go on a missions trip to India. And so they started talking to him, and anybody who knows Prem knows that he will do anything to help. And so he offered to translate some of their materials for their mission trip. And through the course of their conversation, I was standing in the back. He was up here with Peggy. She ran to the back of the room, and she was like, Diana, you have to meet this guy. And so I came up and I talked to him and I was polite. It wasn't necessarily love at first sight or fireworks. He was wonderful, but I didn't quite see it yet. And so I then went about my business. They got to know each other. They worked on translating these materials. And a couple weeks later, she was like, no, really, you got to meet this guy. And the rest is history. And so we need our natural parents, but we also need spiritual parents as well. And so first things first, let's go ahead and talk about the natural. So from a Hebrew perspective, when we look at this psalm, the idea of blessing would be a family that bears a lot of fruit, which would be children, and then to see multiple generations around the table. That would be about the highest blessing that you could have. In fact, if you've noticed in the Old Testament, we actually don't see many references to heaven or the afterlife. it's not very well developed yet. We just know there's a Messiah who's coming, and that's where they kind of developed the understanding that he would be a military leader who would save them from all of the oppression that they felt around them. But so there wasn't much of this idea of the afterlife. So then children and grandchildren and that natural inheritance is what you hoped in. And we know from the life of Job that the idea of blessing was very closely tied to your conduct. And if you had sin in your life or if you adhered to the law. You know, Job was flawless, but his friends kept asking him, no, really, what did you do? Like, surely you did something. You know, they didn't understand because the idea of blessing was physical. It was if God has his hand of blessing on you, then your wife will be fruitful, and you'll have all of these kids like olive shoots around your table. And so today I want to talk a little bit about olive trees and olive shoots, and then also the prophecy of Jesus related to that. And so let's talk a little bit about the olive tree. So any of us here that are adults are olive trees. So are there any olive trees in the room? That's all of us? Okay, good. All right. So our job is deep roots. And the olive tree lives for hundreds of years and sometimes thousands of years because it has this deep root that goes down. And so the first 4 or 5 years of its life, it actually spends driving that root down into the ground, and that root will be about the same height as the tree. And these trees, they'll sometimes get up to about 20 feet tall. Now, after that, they start to develop a secondary root system that's a lot closer to the surface. And because they're mostly living in these dry, arid places, they need that shallow root system to just get some of that surface water when it happens to rain. However, that deep tap root is the one that can sustain through drought, through strong winds, even through fire. And that's how the olive tree lives hundreds and thousands of years. You know, around here we have lots of oak trees. And some of our oak trees might be 100 or 200 years old. But even us living on the farm in Northfield, a good strong wind or tornado kind of weather would come through, and those trees would tip over and they're done, and that's it. Whereas these olive trees can continue on because of this deep root. And so for us as parents, our job is deep roots. And our job is to be doing the things to help us to send that root down deep such that we are drawing from living water and then ultimately sustaining our little shoots that I'm going to talk about here in a minute. I want to share the story of Susanna Wesley. She's become a little bit well known. There's some folklore around her parenting. So she lived back in the 1700s in England. Her sons were John and Charles Wesley. They actually helped found the Methodist movement. And so they've become really well known. Well, Susanna had 19 children, and 10 of which lived to adulthood, and her husband was a pastor, but he wasn't a very good one. And the church didn't really take much of a liking to him. So they lived in the parsonage. The parsonage was burnt down 2 times. Because again, they didn't really love their pastor and there was a lot of adversity. And he would even go away to travel or to study or different things. And Susanna was left home with these 10 kids that she was homeschooling and also teaching the Bible. So part of the lore around her is that she would actually take her apron and pull it up over her head. And everyone in the family knew, from the youngest toddler to maybe even a hired hand that was helping chop wood, that if she had the apron over her head, she was meeting with the Lord. And she would use that time to pray. She would use that time to read the scriptures. And she said that she committed that she would never spend more time in leisure than she spent in prayer. And I think it really begs the question, in 1700 in England, what is the leisure that you're actually foregoing in order to spend time praying, right? I chopping wood, mending, cooking, I don't even know. But I think about for us today, now we have leisure and we have entertainment, right? And so for us to have that discipline to possibly say that before I look at my phone or I go on social media, I'm going to commit myself to prayer. It's an amazing example. And one thing that she also committed, I think, is really cool. She was from a family of 25 children. She was the youngest. And so it says here, she knew from personal experience that quality one-on-one time with a parent is hard to come by in a family with many children, yet powerfully important. So she set a rotating schedule through with each of her children spent an hour with her alone before bedtime on a designated night each week. So 2 hours in prayer, 1 hour with each child. And I think it's a beautiful testimony because we're going to talk a little bit about our children as olive shoots, and they do need our time and attention. We all know that. But also that time spent in prayer and worship is something that they benefit from. The other thing that happened, again, when her husband would be away, they would have visiting pastors who would come and speak at the church. And she didn't find them to be very stimulating. And so she would go home after lunch and teach her children her own Bible study on Sunday afternoons. And because of all of that time spent in study and in prayer, her teaching actually became really well known. And to the point that other members of the community started asking if they could join the Bible study. And before she knew it, there were 200 people at her Bible study, and they had to move it back into the church. And so again, the fruit of that driving our roots down deep and committing that time is amazing. And then not to mention her children. And so John Wesley was the founder of the Methodist movement and preached to tens of thousands, riding on horseback from location to location, preaching up to 3 times per day into his 70s. Charles aided John and also wrote more than 6,600 hymns that are still in use today. What an amazing legacy. And there's a Christian author and speaker named Ruth Chow Simmons, and she has 6 sons, and she talks about bringing a new baby home and just being tired. And this particular baby didn't sleep well. Anybody have a baby that doesn't sleep well? and she was so tired, but she would see her husband get up early in the morning, and he would stagger down to the kitchen table, and he would open his Bible, and he would spend time in the Word. And she came down groggy, and she's making her coffee, and she said, "How can you possibly get yourself out of bed when we've gotten no sleep?" And he just said, "How can I not?" And the fun part of her testimony, sometimes we just have to get through those early years, but as he continued in that pattern, now each morning, all 6 of her sons end up gathered around that table, studying the Word before they go off to work and school in the morning. And so that's our opportunity as olive trees to send our roots down deep so that we can draw from the water of living life. So our little olive shoots. Now, the interesting thing about the olive tree is the reason that it can sustain through all of these years and all of these hardships is because it has these little shoots or suckers that grow at the base of the tree. And some of us have seen this in trees in our own yard, and we just trim them away, right? Because they're going to take away from the health of the tree. And when we look at Psalm 128, and it says, "Your children will be as olive shoots around your table." These are the olive shoots. And I want to encourage people with the little olive shoots this morning, especially those kids that are under like 5 or 4. The interesting thing about these olive shoots is you actually can't prune them for the first 4 to 5 years. You just have to kind of get through. And I know some of us young families, when we get together, we're like, we just want to have family worship and Bible study. We just want the kids to sit there like nice little olive shoots around the table. But when they're 3 and 4 and 5, they do not sit. They do not listen. They don't really want to participate perfectly in family worship and prayer. And so I think it's encouraging because our oldest just turned 6. And all of a sudden, it just feels like a different kid. Like she just got her first big kid Bible, and she wants to sit and read it. And she's asking questions. In fact, proud moment, if I may. She has her little Bible. She's reading the Beatitudes and everything, and it was talking about how if your eye causes you to sin, you have to scoop it out. And I'm like, okay, like what question is going to come up, right? I'm like, can we please just keep reading? Please just keep reading. And she says, "Mama, what does that mean?" And before I could even answer, she said, "Oh, like if there's something bad in my life or it causes me to do something bad, I should take it away?" Yes. Adley, would you like to share on Sunday morning? That would be beautiful. And so my sister had told me, I mentioned I have a twin sister. Her kids are older than ours. And she said, "Diana, you just have to really hold firm those first 3 years. Like if you're firm, then they'll come in line. And after that, it'll be a lot easier." Well, our oldest, Adley, turned 4, and I was like, it still doesn't feel easy. And she said, well, I was just trying to encourage you. It's actually probably 4 or 5. And she's like, I didn't want to, cause you to, I wanted to encourage you. I didn't want you to feel alarmed. And so our little olive shoots, sometimes when they're little, we do our best. We try to shape them, but we just have to let them grow. And then it's when they turn about age 10 and up that they start bearing fruit. But really, and I think some of us with older kids can find encouragement in this, the full fruit-bearing years don't start until age 30. And age 30 to 70 is the prime for an olive tree to produce fruit. And I think that can also encourage us, through the teen years and the 20s when they want to change majors and you don't know about their friends or they're doing things that are different than you would want them to do. Sometimes we have to let them grow, and we have to trust that not only do we have a role in pruning, but so does the Lord. And he can use the circumstances of life, and he can use some of the bumps and bruises and decisions to prune and to shape, such that then when we get older, probably most of us had a few bumps and bruises and missteps along the way, but then when we get older, we can really come into those fruit-bearing years. So I'll tell you one more story of a famous mom. This is Sarah Edwards. They were located here in Massachusetts. Her husband is Jonathan Edwards. He was a key figure in the Great Awakening. And Sarah actually had 11 children that all lived into adolescence, which was remarkable during that time. In fact, some people actually were envious of her because of that. But Sarah received one of the best educations that you could because her parents and her family were pretty well off. Jonathan also went to Harvard, and so they were very well educated. But Sarah is actually known for her spirituality. And it was said even from a young age that she would be seen having conversations with someone. And her parents, whenever they would ask, they would say, "Who are you talking to?" And she said, "Jesus, of course." And I think it's so cool because they were extremely educated, but they also had a very rich spiritual life. And Sarah and Susanna, one thing they both had in common is they were pretty strict with their kids, and they both were in charge of their education, and education was very important to them. But so was their spiritual growth. And this is a fun story. And so what happened is Jonathan had been traveling. They had a visiting minister, and he became very popular. In fact, the congregation was coming to the church every night during the week to hear this visiting pastor speak. And Sarah was getting jealous for her husband. And so she decided to go into her prayer closet and seek the Lord until he would drive away that jealousy. And it's neat because her 9-year-old daughter is the one who actually tells her the story of her mom going in to wrestle with the Lord and to drive out that jealousy. And then what happened on the other side of it, I think, is really neat. So this is from Sarah Edwards' journal. She said, "I never before, for so long a time together, enjoyed so much of the light and rest and sweetness of heaven in my soul." So she had a pretty intense spiritual encounter with the Lord after this wrestling. "But without the least agitation of body during the whole time, the great part of the night I lay awake, sometimes asleep and sometimes between sleeping and waking, but all night I continued in a constant, clear, and lively sense of the heavenly sweetness of Christ's excellent and transcendent love, of his nearness to me, and of my dearness to him." And I just think it's such a beautiful example for her children and, for our kids to see that sometimes we do struggle. Sometimes we do have jealousy or we have fear or we have things that we're unsure about, but when we can take it into our prayer closet and we can wrestle with the Lord, that he's so faithful to see us through and to bring us into spiritual encounter as a result of us just seeking that purity and pureness of heart. So I know you guys will be very encouraged by this. The Edwards family has one of the most noted family lines. This is 200 years. So someone did their biography 200 years after Jonathan and Sarah had passed away. By 1900, their descendants included 100 overseas missionaries, 13 college presidents, 65 professors, 100 lawyers and a dean of a law school, 30 judges, 66 physicians and a dean of a medical school, 80 holders of public office, including 3 U.S. senators, mayors of 3 large cities, governors of 3 states, a vice president of the United States. And I could see that happening with our church family. I wouldn't be surprised. But again, I just think it's beautiful. It was okay for them to pursue education. It was okay for them. Sarah was known to be a very gracious host, and they were continually inviting people into their home. And it's good to pursue things like hospitality and good manners and raising our kids up with discipline. But they also were so grounded in the Lord. And I just think of how beautiful it is for their light to shine then in all of these areas of culture and not just in the church. So this is the best part, and this is where we're going to talk a little bit more about the spiritual nature of the olive tree and of what Jesus is inviting us into. So grafting is when the olive tree is no longer fruit bearing. So after those 70 or 100 years, when its production starts to decline, then that's when the tree will be chopped down to the stump. Or it could be because of just age or weather conditions that somehow the tree is either broken off or the olive tender, olive gardener, olive guy cuts off the base of the tree. And so then either those shoots can be allowed to grow up, or you can actually just cut a hole in the trunk of the tree and put in a new shoot of a different olive tree. And this is the concept of grafting. And this then would be the understanding that we would approach this prophecy from Isaiah with. So this is Isaiah 11, verses 1 through 3. A shoot will come up from the stump of Jesse. From his roots, a branch will bear fruit. The Spirit of the Lord will rest on him, the Spirit of wisdom and of understanding, the Spirit of counsel and of might, the Spirit of the knowledge and fear of the Lord, and he will delight in the fear of the Lord. So the shoot will come up from the stump of Jesse. Jesse, of course, was David's father, and from his roots, a branch will bear fruit. The roots would be the patriarchs of the faith, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. And I just think it brings so much understanding to one of the just most beautiful prophecies in Scripture. And if we take it one step further, just to show Jesus as this shoot, Jesus' hometown was Nazareth. The word Nazareth comes from the Hebrew root word netzer, which means shoot or branch. So Jesus, the shoot from the stump of Jesse, was from the town in Israel called Shootsville. Isn't that beautiful? I mean, just the beauty of the Bible as you just dig in and start to see these incredible threads that trace all the way through is just wonderful. And so we're going to move forward into Romans, and this is where Paul is talking with the Gentiles that have been grafted in to the church. And Israel is depicted as the olive tree and as God's kind of garden throughout the Old Testament, but over and over again they miss it. And as Jesus comes onto the scene, they don't see it. Again, their understanding of the Messiah probably prevented them from seeing this rabbi who just came, and was among the poor and the least, who was healing, but wasn't the military ruler that they were expecting. And so sometimes the Gentiles were the first to understand it. And so this is where Paul is talking to the church. He's talking to the Gentiles, but he's using this language of grafting. So this is Romans 11, verses 17 to 24. If some of the branches have been broken off, and you, though a wild olive shoot, have been grafted in among the others, and now share in the nourishing sap from the olive root, do not consider yourself to be superior to those other branches. If you do, consider this. You do not support the root, but the root supports you. You will say then, branches were broken off so that I could be grafted in. Granted, but they were broken off because of unbelief. And you stand by faith. Do not be arrogant, but tremble. For if God did not spare the natural branches, he will not spare you either. Consider, therefore, the kindness and sternness of God. Sternness to those who fell, but kindness to you, provided that you continue in his kindness. Otherwise, you also will be cut off. And if they do not persist in unbelief, they will be grafted in, for God is able to graft them in again. After all, if you were cut out of an olive tree that is wild by nature, and contrary to nature were grafted into a cultivated olive tree, that would be Israel, how much more readily will these, the natural branches, be grafted into their own olive tree? And what a beautiful picture of bringing in the unbelievers and the Gentiles. And as we get ready to open a new church building and this amazing space that we're going to have, I can't help but think of all of those who are going to be grafted into the family of God. And I'm just going to go into Matthew and just carry this imagery through one step further. The more you look for it, the more you find it all throughout the New Testament too. In Matthew 3, starting in verse 1, it's talking about John the Baptist preparing the way for Jesus. And if we start then, so this is Matthew 3, and then starting in verse 7. Again, I'm reading NIV. But when he saw many of the Pharisees and Sadducees coming to where he was baptizing, he said to them, "You brood of vipers, who warned you to flee from the coming wrath? Produce fruit in keeping with repentance. And do not think you can say to yourselves, 'We have Abraham as our father. We are the chosen people of Israel. We're good.' I tell you that out of these stones, God can raise up children for Abraham. The axe is already at the root of the trees, and every tree that does not produce good fruit will be cut down and thrown into the fire." So again, why would the axe be at the base of the tree? Do you want to bring me back to, we'll put that tree up that was grafted. The axe would be at the root of the tree or the base of the tree because it did not, thank you, because it did not bear fruit. Amen. It did not bear fruit. And when we look at the New Testament, when we look at the message of Jesus, everything is about the heart. Everything is about relationship. In fact, you know when Jesus is headed into Jerusalem and he curses the fig tree? He goes up to it and he looks and there's no figs, and so he curses it. And the disciples are like, "Hey, what did the tree do to you?" Well, he said, "Hey, this tree has leaves on it, therefore it should be in season and it should be bearing fruit." And he said, "I am tired of the religious, all of the pomp and circumstance. There's all of these leaves. We're pretending that if we do the right things and if we say the right things and we do it in front of the right people, that then we are good, that we are religious, we are holy in God's sight. But I'm coming up and I'm looking and there is no fruit." And so the only way for us to bear fruit is to drive our roots down deep. We have to be connected to the source of life. Again, there are so many temptations in this world, so many things that will water our shallow root system, right? We can probably each, right now, if we opened up our phone, if we opened up our phone, we can find 5 different things to water that shallow root system. But it's a choice, and it's a constant choice to drive that root down deep. So I want to kind of end here in John 15, because we're going to go back to that concept from Psalm 128. Sorry, you guys, I didn't have a slide for this either. John 15. Well, okay, I'm going to do my slide quick and then you can put it up. Sorry. I'm going to go back to, completely cleared it. Okay. I closed the app. So if we go back to, can we go back to Psalm 128 and talking about the fruitful vine? Awesome. Your wife will be like a fruitful vine within your house. And this idea of the vine, for those who weren't nomadic and had a home back in these days, again, it was a very warm and arid place. And so these vines would actually be trained all around the house. And you had to take good care of them. You had to make sure that the soil was in good shape. You had to then carefully prune them, and then you would tie them up. And again, they would kind of grow and flow all throughout the house. They might go outside of the house as well. And so that was the picture of the wife. And I love that, because when your wife or your mom is in a good mood, isn't the house beautiful? It's just like, this is so nice. And so it's good encouragement for husbands to do nice things and help clean the house, and I don't know, whatever tends to your vine, okay? Dishes always, nurture me. And so it's this beautiful imagery of the vine. And again, that's a common picture of blessing from the Old Testament, but Jesus picks it back up. So in John 15, so now you can go to John 15, I'm sorry. And I'm gonna be in verse 4 to 7. There's actually a spider on the podium. That's okay. I'm a farm girl, it's okay. Okay. I actually ignored it for a long time. Okay. John 15, verses 4 through 5. So, these are Jesus' parting words with the disciples. And they're in Jerusalem. And again, these vines would have been very common growing around the doorways and in the homes. And Jesus is giving them imagery that they can hang on to. And he is saying, this is John 15, starting in verse 4. Remain, or your version might say abide, remain in me, and as I also remain in you, no branch can bear fruit by itself. It must remain in the vine. Neither can you bear fruit unless you remain in me. I am the vine, you are the branches. If you remain in me and I in you, you will bear much fruit. Apart from me, you can do nothing. And the word remain or abide is an active staying put. So it's like, I want to go do something, I want to go do that, but I'm going to stay here. I'm tempted to go do that, but I'm going to stay here. I am going to make my home, would be another translation of this, in the Lord. I am going to choose every morning to go down to that kitchen table. Rather than going to my prayer closet, I'm going to go to the place where my children, my little olive shoots, can see me. And I am going to stay here. And I want to read the news, or I want to go back to bed, but I am going to choose to remain here with the Lord. And it's this concept that as we hold on to him, that he also is holding on to us. And there we are driving our roots down deep. We are connected to the source of the only one who can give us the truth, the wisdom that we need, especially for raising kids today. I know a couple of weeks ago, Pastor, you were talking about Gen Z and our college kids, and a lot of concern for them because it seems like the work ethic might not be there the same as when we were growing up. And there's a lot that they're contending with. In fact, the World Happiness Report came out just a month ago, and for the first time, the U.S. is not in the top 20 for world happiness. And the reason is not because of us mature olive trees, but because of the young people aged 10 to 25 have had a sharp decrease in happiness. And I want to propose to you that this is actually our report card. That as parents, as stewards of the next generation, that we're the ones that started scheduling softball and t-ball games on Sunday mornings. You know, we're the ones that now the weekend has become so precious, so now we have birthday parties on Sunday mornings. There is so much that's competing with truth, with rhythms of being in fellowship and being with other believers. And so we, as olive trees, get to stand up and say, okay, we recognize the problem, not on my watch. And I believe us as a church family, we're good at this. I do believe that we've done a good job of driving our roots down deep and of raising up these little olive shoots. But I want to encourage us that as we look at the spiritual nature of this, see, like, imagine this. In the Old Testament, blessing was how many kids you had. In the New Testament, Paul said, hey, if you're single, stay single. Whatever your station in life right now, just do that. I don't want any distraction. I just want you to be zealous for the Lord so that we can graft in new members to the family. And so again, as we think about this new building, as we think about our children and even us going out into this world, there are so many shoots that need to be grafted in. We work with them. We are neighbors with them. Our kids go to school with them. And so as we drive our roots down deep, the natural fruit is that we are going to have this bright light that's shining. We are going to have a hope that the people around us are like, why do you feel hopeful right now? Or a peace that only Jesus can give us. And that is so attractive to a world that feels confused right now, that is unsure about the future, that we can be so grounded, that we can be so mature, we can have such a fat, full base as olive trees that it doesn't matter how many new people get grafted in. And that's the invitation today, and the invitation to us as parents and as spiritual parents today. Again, no matter what your station, that there's so much opportunity to be reaching out to the people around you, and especially to the next generation. So, Pastor, I'll just minister for a little bit if that's okay, and then you can close up. So, Father, I thank you so much for this time. And Lord, I thank you for the image of the olive tree. Lord, that you would give us this picture of a tree that would last for generations and generations and generations. Lord, that as we drive our roots down deep, Lord, that you would continue to bring shoots of new life, and they would find nourishment in us. Lord, in our relationship with you, in our spirituality, and in our hope. And Father, I pray for wisdom for each of the parents and for us here today, Lord God, that you would give us great wisdom in raising our children. Lord, that you would show us each step of the way, day by day, Lord, how to prune, how to nurture, how to guide, when to let their choices prune them, Lord, when to let them be led by the Holy Spirit, when to trust in your hand on their life, Lord, and when also to do the pruning and the guiding ourselves, Lord. Give us wisdom each day.